The topic which we are discussing today is a bit different because in the entire TS formation paper, we are discussing every topic concerned with Telangana, whether geographically, politically, or socially, economically. But today's topic, that is the liberalization and privatization in 1990s and consequences, is a bit different one. How it is different? Because liberalization is not a regional phenomenon, or globalization is not a regional phenomenon. We would like to discuss things with the global perspective, how the things are unveiling at the global level, and what is the impact of those things in India, and who are the agents, who are the people who are bringing in reforms in India, then what is the impact on United Andhra Pradesh, in which Telangana is part. So, this liberalization, privatization and globalization, in short we call it as LPG. Don't think that it is liquefied pressure gas. This is liberalization, privatization and globalization. This LPG is very, very important phenomena in the context of Indian economy, because whatever we are discussing today, like in history, we have some cut points. For example, pre-independence or post-independence. In the same way, or you can understand, we discuss things pre-globalization, post-globalization. Pre-globalization era or post-globalization era means what? The entire economic structure, economic scenario, economic aspect of this country is changing post-globalization. And we would like to see today what is the impact on Telangana. So, the topics we are going to discuss under this is the emergence of regional disparities and imbalances in political power, administration, education, employment, agrarian crisis and decline of handicrafts in Telangana, and its impact on Telangana society and economy. Imbalances in political power or administration and all these things, though we are discussing the topics like this, we'll be going in depth about all these topics, like we'll be talking about the sectors, how the reforms are taking place. Before talking about all these things, I would like to explain the conceptual aspects of this one. So, what is globalization? Globalization, as we understand, global means the world. Globalization is nothing but it's a crisis management to retrieve the economies of the developed countries. See, in history or philosophy, to which sort of historical school you belong to, you can use such words. For example, some of the historians, some of the people who write history say crisis management to retrieve the economies of the developed countries. Instead, they say economies of the imperialist countries or economies of the first world, means all advanced countries, economically developed. So, these countries were undergoing a severe depression. They were into crisis, one crisis to other. It was a regular chain happening the world over. If we look at the phenomena of globalization or global economy, generally what we feel that it is expanding. People think that economy is expanding, you are opening new markets and everything. Post-World War, there is no war because the crisis is over, only trade is happening. This is a false notion majority have. Now, if we see post-World War scenario, there was a boom. Boom means because to rebuild the economies of the countries which suffered heavy losses in the World War, the restructuring was happening, that rebuilding was happening, and it helped to what you call lift the economic condition of US like countries. So global boom was there. It was a boom, post-World War boom was there. But afterwards, you have a recurring shocks, recurring nosedives, recurring problems in the global economy. Why do I say recurring? Recurring means the crisis will happen again and again. After one crisis, you will see another crisis. Because capitalism binds the whole world into one chain or into one unit. When the capitalism binds the whole world into one unit, what will happen? Any crisis happening in any part of the world, in the developed area or developed country or first world country or imperialist country, that will impact the economy of the other region too. This is the general principle. In this aspect, if you see post World War, after a brief boom, the oil shock of 1973, shock. Oil shock means there is a big, I'm not going in detailed aspects about all these things because it takes a lot of time. Just remember all these things and you can just name it and say that this is the reasons of the globalization. Then collapse of Bretton Woods agreement on fixed rates. See, we had different practices. Bretton Woods agreement is there and World Bank is there, IMF is there. All these are international institutions or agreements. TRIMS, you might have studied in economy or international relations, TRIPS and TRIMS. All these things were there which are related to the economy, trade and global markets. So, next, 1980-81 there was a crisis. Then again within 10 years, 91-92 there was a crisis. Then we see a huge change in the entire political scenario of the world with the fall of USSR, disintegration of USSR. Once USSR got disintegrated, the whole world economy is restructuring again. So, politically there is a big fallout. Militarily there is a big fallout, like we don't have Warsaw Pact after this. And in this continuation, you can see the whole crisis is again recurring. Next, Southeast Asia crisis. There was a huge crisis in economies. On one good morning, a bank will go bankrupt completely. A country's economy will nosedive. In Latin America, devaluation was at a higher stage. Inflation was too high. All these things were happening in spite of we feel that there is no war and the global economy is fine. World Bank like organizations, IMF like organizations were bringing out many reforms time and again to make these things settled. Means to come out of crisis, but they couldn't succeed. In countries, many countries in Latin America, they have brought out some reforms like Structural Adjustment Program. They call it as SAP, SAP. This Structural Adjustment Program could not succeed and you had its fallout in many Latin American countries with highest rates of inflation and economies were nosediving. So these are the crises. So this continuous crisis should be stopped. So IMF, World Bank or Bretton Woods or all these things are finally coming on to WTO. I am talking about WTO, World Trade Organization. Before World Trade Organization, there was a huge effort or talks, deliberation between the countries to make WTO possible. And all these things in the direction of globalization. Before WTO, there was Dunkel draft. Based on this, again, WTO was being formed. Doha talks. Doha, there were talks on this WTO formation. So all these things are happening in the global scenario. So globalization is not a simple phenomena. It is an effort. It is nothing new. Capitalism's last phase, this is recent phase, is globalization. They are trying to, through World Trade Organization, or the instruments coming through WTO, what they are trying to do is to force open the markets of the world, all the sectors of the world to capital, so that there will be no restrictions of capital, for capital to enter into any nook and corner of the earth. That is basically globalization. It will help some countries, it will destroy some countries. Who will get helped? Who will get boosted? Who will be destroyed? It all depends on the political nature of the state and strength of the economy of the country. So this is globalization. After globalization, I have explained globalization at length because you will have a question in social issues also. What is the impact of globalization on so and so sector? Impact of globalization on industry. In one of the civil services examination, general studies, they have asked what is the impact of globalization on women? So understand globalization and apply the phenomena in Indian context. So next, what is liberalization? Liberalization in the word itself is liberal, means no restrictions. Abolition of restrictions on commodities or services, TRIPS and all those things I talked about, between different trading nations or countries. This is liberalization. Means there will not be any serious restrictions for many of the trading countries, participating countries of WTO on trade. So market will be forced open for all the countries, trading countries, with all restrictions. Of course, all the all said and done, this is laissez-faire, means free trade practice, is always having bias towards the imperialism, whether it is the capitalism of mercantile capitalism type, or in the latter capitalist industrial capitalism, or last phase of capitalism, which is many of the scholars call it as imperialism. So always, though you say that it is free trade or fair opportunity, it is never fair, or it is biased towards one or some of the group of the countries who are strong economically. So abolition of restrictions is the essence. Deregulation of the industry, end of the license Raj, all these things we were talking about. What do you mean by deregulation? There will be no rules. Means you can have your say when you are coming with an what you call your industry, and there will not be many checks from the government side. Means licensing, there used to be some 10 or 15 licenses, labor license, professional medical license, sanitary license, or trading license, or municipal license. All these licenses will go at one way. That license Raj they used to call, means if you want to start an industry, you have to undergo the pain of going and applying for all the licenses, and you are not inviting the investment or capital easily. Means they have to work on different things before investing. So by ending this, you can invite many investments. This is another understanding of liberalization. So all these things are being done under the guidance of the world economic institutions, global economic institutions like IMF and World Bank. So the essence of this is capital centric growth. Means growth, you always see the growth rate. Growth rate, whose growth rate it is? Is it the growth rate of the country where you can see the people or the downtrodden or the middle sections, or you will see put together growth rate in lump sum or in aggregate and say that we are growing. Always these rates and statistics speak only partial truth. So this capital centric growth is not human centric growth. It is capital. How much capital you are investing, how much market you could open, how much profits you reap. This is the only concern. It will not see how many people are being benefited out of these reforms, how much employment you are going to create. Though all these institutions, all these new liberalized economies are the institutions which are coming in a liberalized economy, they speak that we give so much of employment. That is not the centric one, because this is capital centric. You should reap more benefits. So this is liberalization. Then last one is privatization. What do you mean by privatization? As the globalization is the political aspect and economic aspect of the whole character, means it is the character of this economy. Then liberalization is the modus. A liberalization is a partial modus, means you are changing your psychology to liberalize your tools. And privatization is modus operandi, means how do you implement this globalization or liberalization? That is privatization. Opening of public sector to private players. Today you can see even defense sector, 49% or greater share is going towards private people in many of the core sectors too. So why should you be with all these sectors? Let the private people run. Let the private people run, let them get profit and share the profits with the state. This is what the understanding of this privatization. Gradual withdrawal of states' investments or states' responsibility from public sector is being done. For example, Modern Bread was a company in Hyderabad that was a public sector unit. Why a state government should spend its time in preparing modern bread? Let it be done by the private sector. This is what they said. It is a trading activity. Let the private people do and get the benefits. State has something else. This is what they were talking about. So, gradual withdrawal from the public sector. Then disinvestment in PSUs, public sector units. See, public sector unit has a basic principle, that is service to the people. Public sector unit has an aim. When you are starting a public sector unit, it should have people's orientation, growth of the country and nation. Once the private institution is coming, there is no such morals or aims. If they say that our GDP is growing, it's together because we are doing it in this country, you can see the GDP. But it does not mean that this is a real growth related to the country. So disinvestment in PSU is happening. in the name of losses, in the name of why we should have this responsibility, in the name of growth of private sector, which is more competent than our public sector. So likewise, the disinvestment in PSUs is happening. Many of the companies were thrown with just for pittance, less money. The assets of the company itself is much more than the real value which the private investor is paying to the state. So this is disinvestment. Then in this aspect, more role will be there for the foreign capital, FDIs, foreign direct investments and portfolios, all these things. You can get investments from foreign directly in this privatization. This is nothing but market-oriented economy. Market-oriented economy means it all depends on the demand. It all depends on the production is all dependent on demand. Even at times, the need is also being produced by the product user. For example, we don't need many of the cell phones, but you have hundreds of shopping malls or shops or dozens of cell phone companies trying to sell you a cell phone, which is not a basic necessity. But they create an artificial, what you call a demand also for the commodity. So this is market oriented. It is not just need, but it is the innovation and need of the companies or the private sector to reap benefits. So this is market oriented economy. Even in service sector, you can see the change. Then ultimately, all these things are leading to one thing, that is anti-people or anti-labor policies. Why we are talking about people when we are talking about investment, capital or industry, whatever it is, if people are not there, this investment will not be active. It will be a dead investment. It cannot be called as investment. It lies there like some treasure, that's it. Any investment should reap surplus. It should be invested, reinvested. Any surplus should be reinvested. Investment should be there. This is a capitalist mode. So, anti-labor and anti-employee policies, because the question or the concern is the profit. If the institution or the industry is not getting enough profits because of more number of people will be sacked mercilessly. So, thus, this privatization is happening. So, because of this, what was happening, that LPG, liberalization, privatization and globalization was led by, as I said, this is all international global institutions like World Bank, WTO, IMF, all these people. And the basic change in this period you can see is, previously, before the globalization, set of globalization or the pre-globalization era, states in the country cannot interact or directly take loans from World Bank, or they need not interact. Even World Bank need not interact with the states. It's the center's responsibility or it's right to interact with the foreign or international institutions. But now in this period, you can see World Bank directly coming and making agreements with the state governments for giving loans and restructuring the state's economies. So direct influence of World Bank into the state, into the sovereignty of this country is happening because of this. Another important aspect, another phenomena happening is growth of service sector, decline of industrial sector. There is much benefit or much profit in service sector. You can see today, what is the most advanced industry in Hyderabad is the IT sector. What is industry actually? Do they produce any product? No, everything is virtual. But we had great industrial units like Sanat Nagar, Alvin Industries or Azamabad. We used to produce. Once in 1980's, we used to have manufacturing as one of the major imports to some other countries. BHL-like institutions were there which were doing it. So this growth sector and service sector, if you counterpose growth sector, service sector is growing, manufacturing sector is nosediving or in decline. So at the same time, another sector which is getting neglected is agriculture sector. For service sector, you have all the priorities. I'll talk about it when the state's response will be discussing. But for agriculture, subsidies, every day, whatever subsidy you give, we say that is a free lunch. As if it is the peasants who are at the mercy of the people or the government, and the rest of the people who are not agriculturists are showing some mercy on the agriculturists by giving subsidies. That is why Agriculture sector was also a big sufferer in this period. So, welfare schemes, measures, all these things gone. The concept which I said, no free lunches, this was a popular idiom during this period. No free lunch means no subsidy, no special treatment for anyone. Everyone should compete and prove your competence. That is globalization. That is capital. This is the character of the period, what is happening. So, whenever we see new word, new economic policy, new agriculture policy and all these things. And first, when we talk about Telangana, we see Chandrababu Naidu's regime as the period of reforms. But it is not Chandrababu Naidu who has brought in the reforms into this country. Though Chandrababu Naidu claimed that all the world leaders are happy with me and they listen to my voice and they take me as a role model in countries like India. And unfortunately for Chandrababu Naidu's argument, it is P.V. Narasimha Rao and Manmohan Singh combined which team assured or brought in the reforms into India. That is, economic reforms of 1990s is very crucial. After this, the whole scenario in the economy or economic sector has changed. So, new industrial policy is coming in 1991, that is relaxing the licensing procedure, global linking of global capital with Indian capital, then to achieve production levels, becoming competent level, and permanence in employment. They are saying, though they said permanence in employment, actually what has happened in the process is non-permanence of employment. So, reduction of losses in PSUs, all these things are part of new industrial policy. This new industrial policy has brought in some of the important aspects, that is how the industry should function, how the industry should be run by the government. That is, as part of privatization, things are happening. And next is new economic policy of 1991. Manmohan Singh was the finance minister. P.V. Narasimha Rao was the prime minister. So, Manmohan Singh as finance minister has brought in many reforms. When Manmohan Singh was becoming the prime minister, in the beginning days, within months or days, everyone was talking about one thing, that is, see the greatness. An economist is heading the department today. That economy or finance or our economy will be in the hands of an able man who is none other than a professor who teaches economics in D school, that is Delhi School of Economics, Manmohan Singh. So, Manmohan Singh as finance minister, and we had new economic policy. This new economic policy has really brought in many important changes in the entire country. So, neglect and decrease of number of PSU. Neglect means the investments which are needed will not be given to the PSUs. Neglect, they will be completely neglected, they will not be given any of the subsidies, or they will be completely ignored. They will not touch it, they will be, that will be left to its natural death. This is about the public sector. This is part of your economic policy. Withdrawing the state's role in many sectors and bringing in private parties or private players into all these sectors. That is the essence. So, this liberalization, privatization and globalization has spread to many fields, and especially in the field of education, healthcare and employment. Why? Education and healthcare. These two are very crucial departments. Education, you are investing on a generation or a succeeding generations together always. You can make your impact through education on a generation. And here, LPG, private people are entering into education, and now education is completely being privatized. Then, employment, no guarantee to your employment during this liberalization or globalization. You have to compete. Till the second you compete, you will be there, otherwise you will be thrown out. That is why we have many concepts of employment coming in this period. That is contract. Second one is Second one is contractual labor. Second one is outsourcing. Third one is like use and throw, hire and fire. All these words are coming in this phase. So this phase is very important in the Indian context. Here, speedy implementation is very important. Central government under P.V. Narasimha Rao was for speedy implementation, but many of the states are not ready to implement these reforms. When we say economic reforms, when we say this globalization, at the outset, when we see globalization, it looks something very beautiful. Means everywhere the capital can go, everywhere you can provide an opportunity for employment and all these things. But in reality, what will happen? You will see in the next unfolding minutes. So here, only few states were responding. And it's not the question of response also. Some of the states having some advantages got or caught hold of the opportunity of this globalization. For example, AP is one. The other one is Haryana-like places where Gurgaon-like areas are the now hubs of these economic reforms. Then Bangalore-like cities. Show me in the entire country how you have so many cities, but these three places are the showcasing models or showcasing things for globalization. So, in this background, Andhra Pradesh, United Andhra Pradesh, has become an experimental ground for World Bank. Why they have chosen Andhra Pradesh? Why not some other state? There are two reasons. Though I am not giving in this PPT, I have read about these things. Why World Bank is serious about Andhra Pradesh? It's because Andhra Pradesh has different characters. One is left-wing extremism or Naxalites are there. Second thing is a big political class is there which will support World Bank. So these two contradicting things are there in Andhra Pradesh. In this background, what has happened? The World Bank policies reached Hyderabad or Andhra Pradesh, and Chandrababu Naidu was the person who was eager to implement these things. That is why whenever he says, if we listen to his speeches of those times, he preferred to be called as CEO of Andhra Pradesh than CM of Andhra Pradesh. CEO is a corporate terminology. When you are using corporate terminology, it is to show that I am strict in implementing the World Bank reforms. That is what Chandrababu Naidu did. He sent signals by saying such things. And P.V. Narasimha Rao, Manmohan duos initiated reforms. In their period, definitely, since they are unleashing or unfolding or introducing, they will be promoting it. But on the other hand, after P.V. Narasimha Rao regime, what is happening? It's a coalition. Coalition politics is the main character of this period. Starting from 1990s onwards till date, you can see 1980s till date. This coalition politics is also very important at the central level. So coalition politics is another factor which helped for this LPG becoming implemented or LPG being implemented in Telangana or other parts of the country. So what Chandrababu did was, he brought in an USA agency, that is McKinsey company, to prepare a draft to change or to enter into the new era of globalization. That is McKinsey and company. It's a private company. You see, the fate of the people is being put in the hands of a private capitalist company that is US based by the elected leader. Don't you see a serious problem in our democracy in that way? So a foreign company dictating terms of your growth, of the model of your growth. So this is the bad thing. So McKinsey company brought out a document known as Vision 2020, and January 1998, he declared that implementation of Vision 2020 will happen. 2020 means till 2020. So to implement this, Chandrababu Naidu has created 14 task forces. Thus, now the ball is on roll. The chariot is on roll. That is globalization, privatization, and liberalization are happening in Telangana.